I'm Arthur Williams III, Senior Executive Vice President and Head of Strategy, Digital, Innovation, and Enterprise Payments at Wells Fargo. Today, I have the pleasure of sitting down with Mike Hayes, Managing Director of Insight Partners and a former Navy SEAL. Mike has held senior executive roles at major companies like VMware and Cognizant, where he is responsible for business operations, SaaS transitions, and large-scale change management programs. He played a pivotal role in VMware's successful $69 billion sale to Broadcom, one of the largest global technology deals ever. His experience, ranging from being a Navy SEAL to serving as Director for Defense Policy and Strategy at the National Security Council, Mike brings a unique perspective on leadership and strategic thinking. His passion for technology and its potential to elevate societies and create meaningful impact is evident from his work in enterprise technology, data analytics, machine learning, and automation. In addition to his impressive resume, Mike is an all-around stand-up guy, a medal veteran, and author of bestseller Never Enough, and donates all book profits to the 1116 Foundation, his 501c3 that pays off mortgages for Gold Star families. He's a philanthropist, and the list goes on, and I'm thrilled to have Mike join me today and discuss core principles of excellence, agility, and creating impact to ensure sustained growth and success. Mike, so welcome. It's so good to see you. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Since the last time you and I spoke, a whole lot has changed. The last 50 days or so, since the new administration has come in, has created a completely different dynamic in business, in the country. Regardless of what side of the aisle you're on, it's created a different energy and buzz around the country, which requires a lot of adaptation. So I thought maybe we could start back at the beginning and talk a little bit about your career, and start with back when your early days, your time in the SEALs, which was obviously very distinguished, and what you learned from that and how you've sort of taken that into the myriad roles you've had in technology. And then we can kind of then start talking a little bit about your book.
Amazing. Well, Ather, I spent time in Washington, D.C., so I know how to not answer the question I was asked. So let me start in a different spot by saying thank you. And it's a real pleasure and honor to be here. And, spending time with the Wells team is always awesome. So many, many thanks. For me, I've had a very diverse career along a lot of different axes, whether it's, running a SEAL team or being in the C-suite of a large product company or being in the services world, running defense policy and strategy in the White House. I think for me, one of the largest things is thinking really about values and saying, what's the mission that you're on? Because a lot of people look at the SEALs and all of these other different private sector companies, whether it's Wells Fargo, Insight Partners, or other places, as being vastly different. But really, I think it's just a question of how do we lift society? And we can all have different views. That's what makes the world go round. But when you really step back and say, what mission are we on? That's the most important thing. I think a lot about just using a simple framework of GDP, which you know better than I. It's just labor times productivity equals the total economic output of a country or the globe. And if we think about what we're doing here, it's just productivity, whether it's Insight or Wells. Wells you guys are in one of every 3 households in this country. Like, that's phenomenal. And if you think about the basic thing that you do, you've got spenders and savers. You've got savers who want the highest return on their savings, and you've got spenders who want to borrow at fair rates that enable them to take their ideas and make the economy and the world go round. And so when you're in a large enterprise, which both of us have spent a lot of time in, how do you think about being an employee, being part of a team, and keeping your eye on that big mission? If there's anything I've learned, it's really that the more connected you are to the mission at hand, the less it feels like work.
Wow, you made me actually think about that. Candidly, part of the reason I came into banking was I love solving problems, and I think about, when I get up in the morning and look at any publication, I can bring it back to what I do every day and how we're going to have impact on whether it's our corporate clients or individuals, and how we can either, allow them to run their companies better or run their financial lives better. And I found that really impactful. And some work I do outside of Wells on some boards is really focused on that same thing around your physical health and healthcare. So I think it's just that mission is really important. How do you what advice did you give to your team members today, or to your team members when you were in the SEALs, about how to connect themselves personally to the mission? Because it's one thing to understand that here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to
Totally.
do these things, but like, how do I kind of align it to my personal value set?
I think it starts with understanding what motivates you. Like, first of all, we're all motivated by basically some combination of the same things: quality of life, compensation, promotion, having your name up in lights, being part of a mission. We're all different, but we're all like basically have the same intrinsic motivations. And so, like, if I have a team of people where one person is like the promotion person and another person is the comp person and another just wants their name up in lights, how do we, what, like, to me, the art form of leadership is, how do you connect the overall vision and strategy and goals of the organization to help you, who might not be motivated by the same things as me, but translate it so that we can help you in your own career and your own aspirations. And I think it's just being okay with understanding that everybody's different and we're all motivated by those different things.
So one of the things that always stuck with me when we first met, I asked you sort of like, basically like, what made you choose the SEALs? And you gave one answer, which was because it was the hardest thing, which I definitely appreciated. The other thing you said is about being part of something bigger than yourself, which I think is also telling. So when you look at organizations you want to be a part of, what do you look for?
Yeah, I look for a platform that can have impact in the world. And for me, Insight Partners is that. It's the largest portfolio of B2B software in the world. And so when you think about, when I step back and really think about markets as a whole, in technology, you have buyers and sellers. There is so much inefficiency making that market. If you could imagine a world, how do you make it more productive, where you help buyers and sellers come together? And that's a fascinating problem to me. I've lived it as a seller of technology. I've lived it as a buyer of technology. I've seen it from every angle. I've been in services. I've been in product. When I was in the services world, I'd tell you needed to build everything. In a product world, I tell you needed to buy everything. So I can see things from multiple angles. And I think the most important thing is to step back and say, is the organization that you're in able to have that impact? I chose Insight Partners because it unquestionably does, and also has capacity to have more impact. And so when I think about a mission larger than self, I think about technology really as the best way to elevate society. If you think about how every single person has a smartphone in their hands right now. I grew up with, a 30 set, a set of encyclopedias with 30, hardback books on the shelf that my dad bought, and that was our knowledge for the family. And you flip through the pages and hope there's something there. And everybody on the street now has infinite access to what you referred to earlier of information. How much better are we for society now for that? Like, that's just so awesome. And so I think about, to your point earlier, how do we find the right technologies that are going to continue to have that impact that moved us from the encyclopedia world to the smartphone world? What's that look like from now to the next 5 years, 10 years, et cetera? So that's a really fascinating problem set. Insight has, as of September 24, 85 billion under management, 600 portfolio companies. We just publicly announced the closing of $12.5 billion worth of new fund. There's a lot of excitement and opportunity. And so what we're doing is really thinking about the future. And I think that's a really fun problem.
When I was thinking about this conversation, one of the things I always love to ask very successful people is sort of how they navigated their choices. I've got, as we've talked about, I've got 3 college-age kids, and they're sort of trying to figuring out their paths, and they overly obsess about the starting point. And I keep reminding them, like, the number of jobs and bosses and things that I've had over my career, like, don't obsess over any one. But you get started and then sort of, but I did have, for me, I had a North Star, things I knew about myself, to your point earlier about self-reflection, that I love to problem solve.
Mm-hmm.
And I love to transform things. And so I've always said, where can I put myself in a position where I'm going to have to stretch, but still have that, I'll call it that comfort zone, of that core thing that's tied to that, but I'm going to learn something new, and I'm going to form new muscles and learn new skills. So when you thought, you came out of college, you decided to become a SEAL. Like, talk me from like that point to how you got to here, and just some of the, either the core North Star for you, or how you kind of make decisions about sort of the future of your career.
I would say the most important thing is knowing where you stand around, like you said, what motivates you. And when I came out of college, the reason I chose SEALs is because it was the hardest thing. This is pre-internet. Nobody really knew about it. I just knew it was the hardest path I could take. 120 guys started my class, 19 finished. And it was training. SEAL training's no joke. You're shivering in the water, not sure when you're going to get out. You're like, am I going to be here another 10 minutes or another 20 hours? Because either could be the answer. And in Hell Week, you're awake from Sunday morning to Friday afternoon, running everywhere with a boat on your head, logs. It's just, they make it really tough. So the thing that I learned was, if you always lean into the hardest thing in front of you, you don't have a binary outcome of success and failure. You have to go down the failure tree one more node and say, did you learn or not learn? Because if you failed and you learned after taking that really hard path, that's how you compound knowledge through life. And if you pick that easy path, you're not going to get as much knowledge. So I think that every time I've had a choice in front of me, I have leaned into the thing that was going to lead to the greatest challenge for me. It wasn't easy to go to the White House and be in a very senior position. I reported to the National Security Advisor, who reports to the president. And I was running my first meeting in the White House Situation Room with zero Washington, D.C. experience on like day 6. And I went to a technology services company with no technology background. I went to a technology product company as a COO and with no product background. And so that's what I would encourage people to think about when I talk about career planning or advice and choices, is to just know it's going to be okay. If you build your foundation, the walls and the roof can always come later, but always work on that foundation, because that is building your general athletic muscles in order to create the outcomes and have that learning and that growth. So for me, I think what's really important now at where I am in my career is to help other people feel like when they lean into those hard choices and they fail but learn, does the organization hold that up as success? Because in the business world, it can be very easy to quickly tear people down. If there's anything we have in life, it's a perfect radar, a perfect antenna for when people are trying to tear us down or when they're trying to build us up. As humans, we never get that wrong. We always know. And so how do we help the people that are trying the hard thing and learning for the organization and holding them up? And that's what, to your role leading innovation for this esteemed, venerated organization in 1 in 3 households, as you're leading innovation, I already know that's what you espouse here. And that's what keeps you on the cutting edge. And that's what's fascinating to be a part of.
So let's pick up on that innovation node, because actually I want to ask you for some advice. So the hard part about innovation in a bank is that very point you said about the second node of failure, because by nature in a bank you're managing risk. That means not taking losses. It's just kind of what it is. However, part of innovation, almost I'd say the most important part of innovation is failure, and then learning from that failure and applying those learnings to the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, over the weekend, I had some time and I was like flipping the channels, and I came across the movie Jobs, about Steve Jobs, and it was at the point in time where he literally got fired from Apple, and then he had come back, and the Lisa project blew up, and there was all this stuff, and I was like, it made me start thinking again about that journey. Hasn't been linear. It hasn't like they invented the personal computer and everything was rosy and now they're $1 trillion company. It was like, no, he got fired from his own company he had to learn from that. He had to come back, and then he had some failed projects. And so part of what I'm trying to work through here is instilling in people that it's okay to risk and it's okay to fail, but you have to learn.
Mm-hmm.
Help me do that better.
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to kind of try my best to connect 2 answers. One is like, let me take little elements of multiple parts of the career. In my early days in a SEAL platoon, if a SEAL platoon is training in the States to go overseas, like there's a training environment, if all you're doing is succeeding, you're not training hard enough. As a commanding officer of a SEAL team, if I looked at my SEAL platoons and all they did was succeed, I'm like, guys, why aren't we freaking going harder? Come on, I want to see failure, because you don't know where the limit is. When I was speaking at town halls at VMware, we had 40,000 employees. The thing that I would remind people is we can afford to lose any $1 or $10 million deal or whatever. As long as we're on the right side of the law, ethics, policy, we can lose anything. We don't want to, but if we lose, have we done the root cause analysis to say, what's the failure? Really, why did we fail? Do we understand that? And will our system fail again? Because when I think about designing an organization for any sort of a corporation, I want a system where individuals can fail, but the organization still can succeed. Because that way, in that fail and learn component, we can have people fail and learn, but the organization can still win.
That's fascinating. That's actually fun. Thank you for that. That's helpful. I want to ask you about excellence, which is another core theme in your book. And so when I think about, striving to get better every day, and I know you wrote about it in your book, you lived it, you live it now, you lived it in the SEALs. And one of the things that I've always admired about people who serve our country, and particularly in the SEALs, is your ethos that the only easy day was yesterday. Impressive. And so talk to me a little bit about what that means for you and how you sort of advise your teams.
Well, Aether, let me start with saying my mom hated the title of my book. She was like, who's going to go buy a book that says that I'm never enough? But what it comes from is the saying that you're only excellent if you know you're never excellent enough. That has nothing to do with age or seniority or anything like that. It has to do with the hunger inside to be better. And then what's it take to be better? It takes that drive and that passion to do the thing that you've chosen to do. And I think there are two other components really around excellence. It's the ability to be objective about yourself and get real information, and then reflective to say, what could I have done better? In the SEALs, we are really masters of one thing. It's after an operation, we do a debrief and we don't talk about what went well. By definition, inertia will keep what went well going well again. We talk about what didn't go well enough. And if I brought you into one of our team rooms after the hardest of missions, or actually the easiest or most successful of missions, and you heard all of us talking, you'd think that we were an absolute train wreck, because we're focusing in on where can we be better. And so I grew up for 20 years in the SEALs in an environment, in a culture where we were very hard on each other, but in a very constructive way where we lifted each other up. Because I know, Aether, after a mission, if you tell me, hey, Mike, you zigged and I think you should have zagged, let's dive into that. It's not really necessarily helpful to talk about zigging or zagging, but it's more important to get to the principle layer to say, why did you zig or why did you zag? Because no situation will be the same twice. And so what you want to find are the principles that you can repeat in life and say, how do you reapply some of the learning so that the next situation you're going to be in, you'll be able to use that. And it's just like you've seen in your career, in your incredible career in innovation, transformation, leadership, running businesses, you're pattern matching. Like at this point in life, you're like, oh, I've seen this movie before. It wasn't identical, but the concepts were the same. And here's the things to look out for. Here's where the risk is. Here's where the opportunity is. And then we steer our organizations in the way that we think they need to go. And I would say one asterisk, though, is that I think that what makes really great leaders is that you don't know everything. And so the point around this is really running a process, if you will, to get to that best outcome. I like to say, leaders need to know how to lead and know how to follow, but most importantly, know when to do which. Mm-hmm. And so if you know when to do which, at this point, we're usually better off standing in the back of the room and watching the magic happen, and then you step in when you need to. And so I think really when we talk about excellence and agility, it's about lifting others up and making others better. That's the core of it.
Well, I think that when you talked about doing the, what we would call an after-action review or the debrief after a mission, I think you mentioned one key word, which is constructive. Mm. And I think that I've worked in a lot of different companies in a lot of different groups, and those, while feedback can be a gift, how it's delivered matters.
Yeah.
And it matters for shaping the right culture so people are honest. They can, we can honestly tell each other, yeah, I wish you had a zigged or zagged or done this differently, or I should have done this differently, and let's improve upon it. And I think that's really important to set in the right culture of a team so that you can have that team growing together. When I think about hiring people today, I look for people who are curious and who constantly want to learn. Because when I think about the world, most of the knowledge has been consumed now into some form of artificial intelligence. And I can, at a fingertip of my phone or my computer or some tablet, get access to the information. That's not the limiting factor. It's no longer the rote learning that you and I did in school back in the day, memorizing that stuff. Now it's actually what do you do with that information? How do you apply it to a situation? How do you enable others to understand it and act on it? That's kind of the next critical skill set, and it's constantly changing. So constantly learning is a key pivot to any organization, I think, as you really try to grow. But so talk to me a little bit about your current role, like, because you've had some amazing jobs for some large product companies in the tech world, and now you're in a very different role at Insight. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that.
I'd love to. And I will emphasize that people can sometimes look at my resume or my career or whatever and think, oh, that guy's got it all figured out. I'm just as lost as the rest of us. We're varying levels of imperfect and just trying to be less imperfect in everything every day. And what's interesting, if there's anything the SEALs gave me confidence in, it's that when you step in a new situation, that you can make sense of it and figure out what to do. So before I answer the Insight Partners thing, the SEAL training, when I was 21 years old, my formative years, we stretch people beyond their limits, and then we get them comfortable. We stretch them even more beyond their limits and then get them comfortable. And it sounds like an exercise in constantly stretching your limits, which it is. But what it really is putting people in a situation where they're uncomfortable, they're in new situations, and you become comfortable with that discomfort. So you can drop any Navy SEAL into any situation. And what's going to happen is you're going to look around and say, what's happening? What's the outcome I'm trying to achieve here? What's the L stands for lazy? What's the path of least resistance in order to achieve the goal? And then what are the different strategies? And you just adjust the different paths in order to get to that outcome. And so I think when you really think about a career, like you said, to your point about hiring, I don't care if I've never done the thing before. It's okay. Like, I'm at an investment firm that's been around for 28 years, and I love to be around people who know a bunch of things that I don't know and that, frankly, I'll never be able to do. I don't know how to restructure a company and get 12 more basis points out of a deal, or to say that's the right one to invest in. I haven't grown up doing that. I've grown up doing other things. And so how do we take the big enterprise expertise and the running companies and the operational expertise that I have, and you couple it up with all the great gifts that all of my teammates have, and then collectively be one great organization? It's respect for everybody, and it's really special. What I'm having a lot of fun now at Insight is looking at these emerging technology companies, because our comparative advantage is looking at entire technology markets and saying, from a macro perspective, what do we think is happening? What are the trends? Where's the world going? And then how do we pick the winners and figure out what does the world need from an emerging technology perspective? And that's just a very impressive process at Insight Partners. In our 600 company portfolio is literally changing the world.
Let's unpack that. Let's unpack the where the world's going. When I talk to larger groups, I talk to them about the industrial revolutions, right? And the amount of how quickly things change between them. So you think about going back to 1900 and electricity, and then you had steam power, and you kind of go through whatever pick your technology or technologies and mark them. But you could arguably say there's about four, and where one would say that artificial intelligence is the fifth, with kind of the internet being the kind of the start of the fourth. That said, one of the things I also talk to people about is when we talk about transformation and driving change, is it's not necessarily about the technology. It's about how people apply the technology. And so one of the things I talk to my teams about, I'm like, let's understand the problem you're trying to solve, and then let's unpack what's the process and how to make that better, and then how do you apply technology to that, not taking a core technology. All that said, there are some amazing technologies that are kind of coming out, it seems like every day. So I'd love to know what you see.
It's a fascinating and fun topic. I think about, let's use a real world example. Let's use whatever your model of choice is. On my walk over here, I'll confess, I typed into my favorite GPT. I'm doing the Wells Fargo podcast. What should I know about Wells Fargo? I wouldn't have remembered that you were 5.2 billion in net income last quarter. It wasn't a Google search, and I also said, hey, I'm going to have a conversation with Ather Williams. He's a great friend of mine, but how do I make him look great on this podcast? And it spits out like, oh, it was way too much to read. But the point is, like, I could use a language model to give me facts and figures and things, which is super helpful. It saved me a ton of time. But what it didn't do is tell me actually what to say right now. And so if I think about all business value is really derived from the application layer. And so what I'm seeing and thinking about are not so much the foundational models, because that's in my mind, what are the applications that will sit on top of that can help workflows be more efficient? How do you take old, legacy businesses where you can take workflows, massively lean them out, and not only make it more efficient, but more value, more outcome for the consumer, the customer, and that's really fascinating. If we go back to your 1852 when Wells was founded. If you think about your Express, the Wells Fargo Express riders that transported money around, that's not here anymore. Well, that was completely disrupted by the next generation, the waves that you're talking about. And I think one of the things that we as humans are scared of is change. So how do we help people be less afraid of change? When I was at VMware, I came in and the first thing I realized we needed to do was completely rebuild our data foundation. And we also simultaneously did an ERP upgrade to consolidate around one ERP. We actually had like 5 ERPs. It was a mess. And so when I think about all of the messy, antiquated workflows that an organization has, I love seeing technology come in and have the ability to simplify those. And when we displace people's roles, very rarely are we actually firing people because of technology. What you're doing is saying, okay, now you can go work on a bigger and better thing and a bigger and better problem for the organization that's going to create more value. So I just think that it's a value creation thing. I don't think transactionally. I think that when you just think about creating value in the world, then great things happen. And that's what really gets me excited.
Given the change in the country and change in regulation, the change in the economy, this happened so quickly in the last 2 months. A lot of people have had to pivot.
Mm-hmm.
You spent time in DC. There's a lot of people pivoting in DC. We as a company are thinking through what the new guidelines mean for us and what it means for our clients and how we have to change. What advice, or how do you in your current role, you're advising companies all over the world, how do you think about it?
I think about it in 2 buckets. I think about the long view and then the short view, which is like today. I start with the long view. If you really zoom all the way back out, think about disruption and innovation and transformation and to some degree displacement. If you look at the economy back in 1800, 50% of our economy was agriculture. In 1900, it was 30%. Today, it's less than 1%. And there used to be lots of jobs manually done on farms and whatnot. Now what you're doing in farming, and I'm not a farmer, I know enough to be dangerous here, but you're overseeing machines that now that drive productivity in agriculture. And so if you think about all the jobs that have been displaced in agriculture, people were scared about that 100 and 200 years ago, but we're okay now. And so I think you have to comfort yourself that before you start thinking about today, know that the long arc is great. When the bicycle was really becoming a thing in like 1920, parents were really worried that kids were going to go too far away from home. And now it's like that's just not a thing. And so you just have to step back and know that it's all going to be okay. That's the long view. Look, the short view, it's about resilience. Things can be really hard. We can get bad news. We can have hard days. Ather, if there's anything I learned in the SEALs, it's that it is all about being a great teammate. I could talk for ages about that. But the essence of being a great teammate is to say that I might be having a hard day, but I'm going to go find the person who's having a harder day and go help him or her. In an elite team, you have some people who are relatively up and some people who are relatively down. So how do you just build the culture and the muscle so that the people who are relatively up reach in and help the people who are relatively down? And if we all live a life like that, some days we're going to be up, some days we're going to be down, but the team will be collectively better. And so I think that, we have to understand people are always having hard days. How do those of us who are having great days reach in and help those people as we have the long arc of transformation?
We're in a new administration. We're in a new part of the economic cycle. And when the world is constantly changing, as you know better than anyone, as people start thinking about, our audiences in people inside of Wells Fargo, we also have lots of our partners, clients, customers, other interested parties who sort of are going to listen to us in this conversation. What message would you give them based on some of the lessons learned in lessons taught in your book and sort of your life about sort of how to sort of approach this next part of the cycle?
Love this topic. Thanks for asking, Aether. The most important thing to me is, how do we understand what all aspects and all sides of a problem look like? How do we disagree more agreeably? How do we think about the fact that no matter what, we have to transform? Like, we can all take the short view, but the long view, like I talked about earlier, is really also what matters. If we don't go through hard times in the short view, we'll never get to the better times in the long view. Yeah. And if in transformation, what I've learned is the closer you get to what needs to be transformed, the more noise there is. And so I'm not going to make any sort of political statements on either side. What I'm going to say is that it's important to not rush to judgment. Suspend your own view for a second and say, what's on the other side of this? Yep. And then just evaluate for yourself. And I think that what we could all benefit from is just taking a beat, taking a pause for a little second and saying, what's happening in the world, what's good, what can be better, and just being intellectually honest, really, and leaning in and understanding that everybody's motivation is to make the world a better place. Nobody comes to Wells Fargo or Insight Partners and says, what can I screw up today? We're all trying to come to work and contribute. Yep. And so I often say, you separate intent from action. My actions often fall short. My intent really, I don't think my intent ever falls short. I'm imperfect, but my motivations to help you, to help Insight, to help my people that live on the same street or places of worship, all we're trying to do in society is lift each other up and make the world a better place. And I think when you keep your eye there, everything else kind of follows after that.
I think that's sage advice. It's taking a breath is definitely key. And look, there are risks and opportunities or things. There's always two sides to every coin, and in this environment, some days you're sort of like, oh, I have to sort of roll with this because it's going in a direction I expected. Other things, it creates great opportunities. There are things that are going on that are like, wow, that's something we couldn't do 4 years ago, so now we can go look at it. Mm-hmm. And so, eventually I think it'll all keep moving forward, and we'll, and I agree with you that the intent, I think, is to make things better for everyone. So hopefully continue that way. So Mike, thank you so much for joining today. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Aether. I'm better for having spent an hour with you here. And thank you so much for being a great friend and a great partner.
All right. Thank you.